afternoon, everybody. This is Robin Ayub from the Localization Fireside Chat, and welcome to the episode number 60. We are recording another podcast this week, and I'm happy and honored to be joined by Jamie Shanks. Jamie is a known name and known figure in the social selling sales arena. He's a sales consultant, strategy person. I've had the honor and the pleasure to work with Jamie before when my company hired Jamie as a consultant, and I got to meet him. He's another fellow Torontonian. He lives in the area. Jamie, welcome to the channel. Welcome to the podcast. Glad to be with you today. Glad that you had the time to join us.
Robin, thank you for introducing me.
I appreciate it. Jamie, let's dig into it. On this channel, we always say everybody's got a story. Tell us your story.
Well, it depends how far back in time you want to go, but from a sales perspective, I was the vice president of sales at a SaaS software company in Toronto, Canada. But I'd always either been a micro entrepreneur, cutting grass as a teenager, or just it's been in my DNA. And I wanted to start a sales consultancy. At that time, there was the emergence of what was called inside sales. So the world was starting to move from where you would give accounts of control, it's called full cycle selling, to individuals, and they would control both the winning of the new deal and then the managing of that customer. They were now bifurcating this to roles called business development representative, sales development representative, and I wanted to be part of that movement. So I started a sales consultant firm in 2010. For a few years, it floundered as I didn't build a productized service that people understood. But then I got really lucky where I saw the emergence of LinkedIn. They maybe had 50 million users on the tool. It was primarily a recruiting tool at the time. And I coined a word called social selling. And it took off. It became a Google trend. And we scaled to 600 global customers, making millions and millions of dollars a year. But that company, and we'll get into it, ran into a bit of financial hardship in 2018. Essentially, we were just spending more money than we were making. And it taught me how to look at my denominator, my operating expenses differently. And then I started into a journey around offshoring. So long and the short is a lot of different experiences, but all centered around sales and marketing.
So speaking of experiences, and we all had this before, can you speak to a specific experience or a mentor that influenced you in this direction? Did you have any mentors, or this is all because I got a lot of employees or a lot of people that they want to, on the sales side, they call me up, say, hey, Robin, what do you think? And I have the honor and the pleasure to play the mentor for many people. Have you had early on a mentor that perhaps you looked up to and you said, I want to do this based on what I've seen?
My most memorable mentor, so it wouldn't be my first one, but my most memorable was in 2018. My company, Sales for Life, was making millions of dollars a year, but I lost $1 million. I was $1 million in debt, which didn't make sense to anybody that ran a professional services company. And I had a lot of companies coming after us to acquire us because we sat on the intellectual property of social selling that the world wanted. So as I was going through merger and acquisition due diligence, one of the firms that looked to acquire us realized they could either acquire me for a song and a dance, or they were more friendly than that. The CEO decided to become my mentor for the next couple of years. We did a monthly call every month for, it must have been probably 3 to 4 years. But what he taught me was the denominator. As a salesperson, all I ever did was chase more and more revenue, giving very little afterthought to the idea that $1 saved is almost like $5 I don't need to earn if I'm a 20% profit business. So he taught me financial acumen. He taught me operating leverage and margins and so forth. So that's my first, or that's not my first mentor, but that's the most memorable because he transformed me to more well-rounded founder of somebody that didn't just chase a dollar for dollar's sake, but also tried to build sustainable businesses.
You bring up a very good point because, even in the corporate world, you see a lot of CEOs and a lot of executives that they came from that sales background, Jamie, and they end up being a CEO of a company or a large organization. So that shift is inevitable. That needs to happen. That needs to happen. The focus from the top line to the bottom line and balancing the two. When you're in sales, as you rightly pointed out, you're always chasing revenue because profitability is somebody else's responsibility. When you're the owner of the company or you're the CEO of an organization, it becomes a dual responsibility for you. So I understand the pressure. Now, shifting a little bit to social selling, and I know LinkedIn has been around since the early 2000s, late 90s. So beside, how did that whole shifting to social selling happen for you? And when did you realize it's an opportunity? I know you started the conversation by saying LinkedIn was a job board, and you were rightly so. It was a job board. And then all of a sudden became the place to sell. And then you have developed, and I know from before about conversation with you, you developed the secret sauce for this. So let's talk a little bit about this one.
Yeah, the big inflection point for myself was actually a compelling event. So behind the scenes, I have this sales consultancy called Shanks Group. So it's me and the dog, basically. And I was struggling for business development for myself. So I had customers, but I wasn't winning enough customers to sustain my lifestyle. Long of the short is I, in a panic, started looking at how I replicated my business development efforts that I was comfortable with, which was cold calling, emailing, which was all pervasive tools of the trade in 2010, 2011. For whatever reason, each night I'd have trouble sleeping. I would sit up in the global head office, the spare bedroom, with a laptop, and I would just stare at my computer and think, there's got to be a better way to prospect. And for whatever reason, this is somewhere in the year 2011. I remember looking at LinkedIn and I would just start experimenting. And I started to discover that the left side of the prospecting is basically a left side of the brain and a right side of the brain. The left side of the brain is data and facts. So who am I going to engage? And the right side of the brain says, what am I going to say? Well, it turns out this tool had both. It was the world's database emerging every day. It was still very small at the time, but more and more, and I only focused on Toronto-based chief revenue officers and founders were in this tool. And at the same time, they had these buttons where I could click it and actually talk to them, and it would message them via LinkedIn, and it would go into the email tied to their LinkedIn account called Double Potency. I thought, my God, like I'm bypassing a gatekeeper here. And it had all kinds of other widgets and boobobs where it would, back then, they had to remove this once they discovered we were teaching it to people. You could go onto a LinkedIn profile, and it used to have a ticker tape called Signals, ironically, that would show every transaction that Robin is doing on LinkedIn. So every connection that he makes or every action he takes on LinkedIn, this is 12 years ago, actually had a history record. So I could actually see who's connecting with who. So if I had a customer and that customer's happy with my work, I could see who they connect to, and then I could ask for a referral. So anyways, long and the short is I started teaching myself how to use LinkedIn. And then I would show my customers these tips, tricks, and tactics. And they were way more interested in this LinkedIn for business thing than they were in cold calling. And then I was at a conference in Chicago in 2011 called the American Association of Inside Sales Professionals. Now it's called Emblaze. The conference still exists. And there was a keynote speaker, and the topic was LinkedIn for sales or LinkedIn for business. And the keynote, her name was Josiane Fagan, was up on stage talking about how this could be this thing. And I raised my hand. I was an audience member. I raised my hand and I said, hold on a second. I'll give you some stats and figures and things that I've been doing for myself or for our customers. It completely changed the keynote. The whole room started shifting towards me rather than the person on the stage. People were firing me questions. At the end, people came up and gave me their business cards. And I realized that there was such an appetite and demand at that moment for a change in sales. And that's kind of where it all began.
Now, Jamie, like social selling, though, although LinkedIn is the favorite, but I would assume that it would include other platforms as well, right?
Correct. So LinkedIn is the most obvious when you describe social selling. The next question that people ask is, what does that mean? And all that it really means is you are engaging your customer and meeting that customer in a digital manner using the very digital tools that you and that customer use every day. And so LinkedIn is the most pervasive. There was a period of time where Twitter was very popular and it's kind of come in and out of fashion. There's video, especially video embedded into an email. That's a form of modern digital selling or social selling. So all that you're doing is digitizing a sales process that already exists. You took it from analog to digital.
So, as you mentioned earlier, like the platforms are changing. Some of the key features in technology that started with LinkedIn early on no longer there. They either updated them, removed them, etc. Where are we now? And what can you talk a little bit between when you talk about LinkedIn, the difference between LinkedIn itself and the various licenses that you might have, premium versus basic, and also Sales Navigator, which seems to gain in traction.
Yeah, where we are now is we're almost at 1 billion users on LinkedIn. So it has moved into what we'll call the essential services or the critical factors. If you look at if you are a sales professional and or if you're a founder who's responsible for sales in your own business, there are certain tools that are must-haves. You must have an email account. You must have a website. You need a CRM to keep track of everything. And you most likely, if you're going to choose one tool that is going to capture the world's data, employment data, buying committee data, and also an alternative communication medium, it will be LinkedIn. So that if you think of tabs that are open on your computer at all times throughout the day, you have email, CRM, and LinkedIn. It is that pervasive. Now, there's LinkedIn, and there's a version of it, LinkedIn Premium, and then there's Navigator. So I'm a big believer of process before platform. So LinkedIn Navigator, all that tool is a bolt-on account-based planning tool on top of the existing database that is LinkedIn. So LinkedIn has 1 billion users in it. Navigator sits on top. It's not new data. It's a different way to view and identify data. So you can do queries on people. So I want to find people in a geographic region, a vertical, a named account. I want to see who took a new job this week. It allows you to filter that way. You want to do filters on companies. Yeah. I want to know all the companies in Toronto. I want to know all the companies that are greater than 5,000 employees or have hired new heads of localization, as an example. You can use it for that. So it organizes you in an account-based view. So those that need Navigator are one of two types of people. They're an account-based seller, or you are a founder who's trying to develop your TAM, SAM, SOM, which is your total addressable market, your serviceable addressable market, your serviceable obtainable market. You're building a map of people and companies that you would target. Otherwise, if you're not doing any of those, then LinkedIn, the free account, does everything that you most likely need to do, which is I want to share insights. I want to read other people's insights. I want to connect with people, maybe have a few conversations. That's what that tool's for.
So now that we've defined the tool, Jamie, let's say some of our audience says, and we have a lot of people who are starting new in this story of selling, and they said, okay, I've identified the audience. What is the first step I need to do? I need to send an email, or I need to reach out somehow, liking their post or commenting on a post. What is your recommendation for the first initial reach out?
So let's assume in this context that these are people you do not know. So this is what would be not only a second degree connection, but then how would we engage? The first most important decision is ask yourself why. And I'm holding up, I'm drinking a bubbly water, and I've got a Yeti water bottle going on at the same time. So these are two different companies. long before you start the active engager. Remember, prospecting is a left side of the brain, which is who should I engage? And then the right side of my brain says, what should I say? We have to go back to the who. And the who asks a fundamental question. I can engage every company in Toronto all day long if I wanted to. That doesn't mean I'm going to be any closer to a prospect. There's a concept called the Chet Holmes Pyramid. And the Chet Holmes Pyramid dictates that only 3 to 10% of a market is either actively trying to buy or even thinking about the possibility of change at any given time. It is truly a needle in a haystack. The rest of the 90% are nowhere near. So imagine you spend 90% of your effort getting nowhere if you just start engaging. So you have to ask yourself the question, why should I go after Bubbly versus Yeti? And the decision has to be based on an objective, compelling event, signal, or trigger. Some of my most favorite, of course, are when somebody leaves employment of your happy customer, the Yeti water company, and they join another water company that is a prospect of yours, but you've got an advocate or a champion that sits inside that business. Now, all of a sudden, to answer your question more directly, I've chosen who I'm going to target because there's a reason that I'm targeting. There's a new C-level executive in that business. That person came from a happy customer of ours. I have a very compelling story to tell them. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to, if I haven't already connected with them, I'm going to connect with them on LinkedIn. But my first message is called that sphere of influence. I'm going to remind them that we used to work together, or you're interconnected with my customer, and this is the success we had together. Now you're over at this new company. What are you doing from new initiatives? And I'm trying to do that in the first 100 days of their new employment. This is called the window of change, because statistically, a C-level executive is going to go into a business, try to look at the people, process, and technology they have in that business, and say, wow, I need to change X, Y, and Z. They go to their board meeting at the end of that first quarter. They acquire capital to make change, and then they start deploying that capital against that change. So it's much more difficult to shake somebody off that status quo 9 months into the job than it is when they're on day 45 and they're still malleable to change. They're still thinking about what those changes are. So I hope that answered your question, that instead of just blindly going through engagement, I first am very selective. It's called account selection and prioritization. I do that first. I hone in as to why I'm targeting them, and then I target.
So if I understand correctly, this is from your pipeline signals company, correct?
And so it was actually where that came from is we were teaching this concept. It's actually how I built my company, Sales for Life. We would win a customer, and I win this phone company as a customer. I would draw their logo on a sheet of paper. I would circle that name, and I would build spider webs that came off that customer. And I'd ask myself, who cares about that story? Well, what about people that leave that customer? What about their competitors? What about referrals from those that work in that company?
Or their supply chain or whatever.
Supply chain. So what I did is I would take every new customer we won, I would multiply it with companies that were within 1 degree of separation around that company. So that was the basis to how I grew the business. Well, what happened with Pipeline Signals is our own customers wanted to automate that process. So we created a technology that would track all of these job changes. So somebody would leave a happy customer and go to a prospect. We would then alert them. But the strategy of the play is the most important piece, the why.
Yeah. Jamie, I noticed, you mentioned, prospecting at a C level, which is very appropriate, especially when you talked about like the first 21 days when that individual is on the job, or the first short period that the individual on the job, they're willing to do some changes. Does that apply also to mid-level management and low-level management in a specific company? Let's say the target is not a C-level and it happened to be a project manager or something.
Yeah, so this is what's known as the buying committee. And for your audience members, whom you sell to, that buying committee is influenced differently. Some are very top-down sales, right? Like, I'll give you an example. Let's say you were selling $1 million IT security. If you can't get the attention of the CISO, the Chief Information Security Officer, I don't think it really matters who else you talk to. The change management is going to come from the top.
Correct.
But as an example, there are many products and services where it in fact is the mob, so to speak, influences upward to say, hey, we need to these new tools or processes or people, and we want this. And so you influence the champion, they become what's called champions for you or influencers. And they push upwards and they say, hi, C-level executive boss, if I don't have this, I'm going to go nuts. How do we make change? Yeah.
And it sounds to me like when you talk influencers, that there's a bit of the strategic based selling model inside of that conversation, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. And there's strategic selling that can be done top down. There can be strategic selling done bottom up. Absolutely.
Expanding the sphere of influence, basically, and trying to make sure that you reach every influencer in the sales process. Am I correct?
100%.
Now, for those individual, and you already defined one of the main criteria for success, which meaning focus on the 3% of the addressable market that you think it's got a chance of succeeding and being a prospect. What are the other elements of being successful using LinkedIn and using pipeline signals, etc.? And you mentioned who do they connect to? Are they customer currently? Are they these customers? Are they happy with that work? Can they refer us to somebody else? Is there anything else that you can think of in that domain?
Well, in that domain, specifically around social selling, I don't think this will ever go out of fashion. People buy from people. People buy from people they like. People buy from people they like and trust. A very old adage and saying. It is remarkable to me the number of, whether they're founders, project managers, sales professionals, who have not put themselves out there to do exactly what you're doing right now, which is to become a brand, to become an influencer, to become what I used to call a micro marketer. Because at the end of the day, if you're not sharing your insights or thoughts, then imagine you're sending an email and your competitor's sending an email in your space around localization and translation. From the recipient's perspective, from the head of localization, or maybe it's the head of a new product at a company, all they see is nameless, faceless emails. But if one, as an example, has been Robin, who shares content all the time around best practices and made a video in that email, and the other is just the nameless, faceless email, who would you buy from?
Correct.
And so the idea is content sharing, as scary as that might feel and as difficult as that might feel, it's a really important process.
And I did notice, and I don't know if it's me being hypersensitive about it, but there's a huge element also to building long-lasting relationships with people and themselves. Like, instead of being a salesperson that it's testing the water and jumping from one thing to another, that laser focus on who you want to connect with and delivering the right messages to them, and over the years continue to building those relationships. I guess that sets you apart from an individual salesperson, whoever you are, salesperson or an owner of an organization. Any thoughts on that?
Well, that's one of those questions that I'll get at a conference. If you were 22 years old again, what would you tell your younger self? Here's what I would tell anyone ever emerging into either sales or starting a business. So there is a podcast by a gentleman named Ryan Moran. I'm trying to remember the name of it. He owns capitalism.com. And what he's discovered in owning many businesses is he is one of the very few people that share a very similar insight to me. Is what he does is, instead of trying to sell the same product, as an example, what he does is he tries to stay within a bowling lane of what's known as ICP, Ideal Customer Profile. And so if I look at my career, even though I've started different businesses, they all serve the same buyer. So it's very easy for me to cross-sell and upsell from one business to the next, or open doors that I once opened in 2012 to now opening in 2024, because I've stayed in a bowling lane of serving a particular community. And that will, and as long as I stay on that track, and I'm 45, and let's say I want to work well into my 70s, I have 30 more years of being able to tap that entire community over and over and over again. As an instance, I have in Pipeline Signals, there's a Saturday Night Live sketch called The Five Timers. It's the guests like Tom Hanks that have been on there more than 5 times. When we launched Pipeline Signals, I officially have customers that have been at Sales for Life 2 or 3 or 4 times. So they bounced from company to company and they became Sales for Life customers multiple times. Then they became Pipeline Signals customers. And now they've become my offshoring agency, Get Leverage customers. It's the same person, just they're working at different companies, but they're always the chief revenue officer or they're always the chief marketing officer. I'm serving that ICP. Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about Get Leverage, which is a company that you've started, and based on our previous conversation here, you seem to be excited about, and you have some positive reaction to the initial adoption, etc. And I want to thank you very much. I want to put a plug here for this book that you sent me, Outsourced for Profit. I really appreciate it. It's a great book, by the way. For those who have not read it, I encourage you to go and get it from Amazon. Jamie Shanks, Outsourced to Profit. And it's about Get Leverage offshore teams to scale your profit. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about Get Leverage.
Yeah, I'll talk to you and I'll put it together from a situation, problem, or opportunity and resolution. Here's the situation. You are either a founder or you're a sales professional. But in both instances, there are so many things you want to do every day. You wake up and you're like, I'm going to tackle these big initiatives. I want to work on my business, or I want to work on my portfolio and territory. And then life gets in the way. And you catch yourself doing $5 an hour tasks all day long. Administrivia. You're updating lists, you're updating your CRM, you're trying to build a PowerPoint deck, there's so many tasks that are not accretive to growing a business. And in sales, they're actually given to you as part of your job description. And over the years, I focused on sales methodologies, sales training, and sales tools. But I kept noticing this other emerging vampire, which is time. And I watched sellers who the bright lights go out of their eyes, or founders, the bright lights go out of their eyes because they're caught doing tasks that, they're just like, that's par for the course. This is what I'm supposed to do. These are all the tasks that are part of sales. But hold on a second. What if we objectively look back and we started separating tasks into $5 an hour tasks and $500 an hour value creation? A $500 an hour value creator is being on a Zoom call with a prospect presenting your solution, or going live to an event, or you're in the final negotiations of a proposal. That's worth $500 an hour. But the meeting notes, pretending this was a Zoom call, the meeting notes from this very meeting that need to be updated into your CRM, that you're going to spend 30 minutes trying to update your key account plan.
Yep.
That's a $5 an hour task.
Mm-hmm.
So I started Get Leverage as a done-for-you service that focuses only on sales and marketing support tasks. We airdrop people into marketing teams, sales teams, customer success teams, or virtual assistants for the founder to start gobbling up these $5 an hour tasks so they can release themselves into the doing the bigger things.
Sorry, mm-hmm. I don't understand. So basically what I'm hearing you is you took a sales job and you dissected, or you peeled the tasks or the admin tasks that takes time, less return on investment, and you focused on where am I good at? And you know what? You bring up a very good point, because I asked myself a question. What am I good at? Where am I best situation to be put in as Robin in a sales situation? And I always go back to, I'm not good at, and I'm, if I say that, I don't know if my staff will hear and get mad at me. I'm not good at updating Salesforce. I'm not good at, detailing all the minutia resulting of a specific conversation with a customer. But what I am good at is in front of the customer, being in front of the customer, handling the first call or the succession of calls with clients, and or the deal closure. So, for my perspective, and from the perspective of many salespeople, like this type of service should be a no-brainer. In my opinion, if there's a way to do it cheaper, more effective, and allow the sales team to focus on what they need to focus on, I think the return on investment here for the owner and for the owner and the shareholder would be great.
And what we're doing is airdropping these support agents into account executive teams, account management teams, and instances like we have. I'm just thinking of tangible tasks. We have a virtual assistant that's dropped into a team, and this team typically sends out a statement of work, like a 10-page PowerPoint presentation, proposal to a customer or a prospect every day. They've got 3 account executives, but every day there's a proposal going out the door. Well, the sellers, after hours, after their dinner, were sitting with a laptop on their laps, changing PowerPoint decks. So now we just take over that task, and all that the account executives do is bounce from call to call to call. They just go into the Google Drive, grab the next presentation that we've made for them, move on. We have the number of account executives, business development reps that have been asked, I need you to show me all the accounts that are in a market, verticalized geographically. I need you to know all the main contacts. I need you to know their phone numbers, their email addresses, their LinkedIn profiles, and I need you to put it in HubSpot or Salesforce. And their whole Sundays are wiped out trying to do these things. And the sales leaders can't figure out, like, well, why aren't you engaging more customers? Well, because I've got to figure out the contact information for everybody. Then I've got to make a call. Then I've got to take the notes from that call, take it all over. And so the average seller, that's 20% of their week. That's 1 out of every 5 days wasted. All we did is it's $1,000 a month resource that just airdrops into the center of a sales team, gobbles up those tasks. And now your $100,000 a year base salary sellers are just jumping from sales call to sales call, not worrying about the minutia behind the scenes.
Jamie, I'm assuming all this is measurable, reportable. The owner can, if they engage the services, your services, can they, measure all that stuff in terms of, I'm paying for X, I'm getting Y kind of thing from it.
Especially when you drop. So it's one thing to have virtual assistants go into marketing teams that speed up content creation, as an example. So more videos, more podcast episodes, and so forth. It's much more tangible on the sales side. You already know your yield per seller today.
Yep.
And so you ask yourself, what if those sellers gained an extra day a week? That's about there's been enough books and studies shown it's about 20% of a week is spent on admin. So if they gained that 1 extra day a week, how many more conversations, Zoom calls, proposals, deals won could they gain over periods of time against $1,000 a month? That's essentially it.
And when we talk about outsourcing the tasks, the out tasking, I guess, if I can call it that, for sales perspective, is there a connection, and I need your opinion on this one, between those entrepreneurs, they never managed sales teams before, or managers, they never managed sales teams before, and that whole element of trust, between the owner and the sales team, meaning that I get all the questions all the time from entrepreneurs saying, well, how do I know they're doing a good job? How do I know they're performing? How do I know they're making the calls? Currently, they don't have tools in place, and if they do have tools, poorly selected tools. But I'm assuming with services such as yours, because it's trackable, traceable, quantifiable, you reduce the chance of saying, well, did they make the calls this week, or did they not make the call? Did we provide them with the wood in the fire kind of thing? So,
because now you actually have somebody whose entire job and remit is back-end data and support. Yep. So you're asking somebody that came from your industry to be a salesperson on your team, or, sellers are A-type personalities. And you've just asked, and we're Canadians, right? So you've asked Wayne Gretzky, who loves to be out there skating around, shooting pucks, scoring goals, or Sidney Crosby. And now you're going to ask them, I need you to count how many laps around the ice you did. I need you to count how many pucks you blasted into the net. Well, now you're paying somebody whose job is to extract that data. So they go into the phone records, pull the emails sent. They are the one actually doing the updates in leads, contacts, accounts, opportunities in Salesforce or HubSpot. They're the ones building the dashboards and the reports. And so the seller just does, ultimately, what did you really want from the seller? You wanted more conversations, you wanted more proposals, and you wanted more deals. How you got there, the only reason you have dashboards and reports is so you can create accountability and tracking and maybe show your investors one day. But those are two different jobs. One is the act of growing relationships, and the other is a data management job. Give the data management job to somebody who it's an affordable, where it doesn't feel like this giant liability. And if you really back up, there are companies, scaled organizations that have revenue operations teams, but they're spending hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars in revenue operations. But that's a liability. If you look at it from the founder standpoint, like that's a cost center for the most part. Well, are you really going to spend all that money on something that could be done for a tenth of the price? And you can now plow those resources back into the relationship people, the people that are customer facing, talking to more people every day.
For the time remaining, I'd like to cover, all industries, not just or all services, not just sales.
Sure.
It seems like we are in an inflection points right now where AI is coming in to the foray of how we conduct ourselves, logistically and from a business perspective, and everything else. And we're at the beginning of this, so changes are coming and continue to come, and the evolution of how we use AI in our world is really. And I've started using some aspect of AI in my sales world. How do you view that? What's the read from Jamie on how AI is impacting sales?
AI is coming there in, I'll call it features and hacks so far. Where I've seen it, there are tools that help me. AI tools like Crystal Knows might help me, teach me about if I'm about to enter a call with somebody, I press a button, it tells me a little bit more about that person. I can use ChatGPT to write better scripts and messaging. I can use it to extract, on the finance side. Long and the short is, right now, I have not seen it where, like, this idea that it's going to replace sellers. I mean, I have offshore resources that use AI all day long, and all that AI had become for onshore people was a distraction. So they give it to the offshore teammates to use and figure out to make them more productive. I believe that one day it's going to be more and more pervasive, but
Yeah,
it's still going to be a co-pilot. And the concept, there needs to be a pilot and a co-pilot.
that's right.
And so the question will become I think the same thing that's happened in a lot of other sales and marketing tech. You'll just have more and more tools, but who's actually going to use it every day? Because we only have so many hours of the day. So there'll be some that can run in the background and improve productivity, but a lot of times there'll be really interesting things that they'll say to yourself, well, somebody's going to have to train it. Somebody's going to have to program it and run it. I can't afford that time, money, and energy. I'm going to give that to somebody else. That's my take. We are a long way away.
That's right.
From this being like, where LinkedIn is in sales right now. Remember my journey. I got a LinkedIn account in 2008. We're in 2024. What is that, 16 years later? That's a long journey.
That's right. That's right. I got my LinkedIn profile in 1999, I believe, or 2000. I can't remember the exact date.
Okay, you're
And,
like,
I remember I remember the conversation. I was working for a telephone company, and my buddy and I were a couple of engineers, and he said to me, "Have you heard of LinkedIn?" I said, "What is it?" And he explained to me what it is, and then we ended up participating in it. And a few years ago, I got an email from LinkedIn saying that I'm number 36,000 or something in the
Oh,
database.
yeah, because it used to be able to look up your number, and I think I was something like 20 million. You could actually, in the number of your URL, your actual user number was in it. Yeah,
Oh, really?
yeah, yeah.
Um, so one of the and as you mentioned earlier, and I'm glad you have the same opinion I do about AI, because I keep talking about AI being managed like as a co-pilot kind of an environment, and you need to really harness it with the use of a human. And as you mentioned earlier in our podcast today, you mentioned human buy from human. At the end of the day, people I think there's a like maybe the generation that we're currently in, maybe the next generation will be a lot more tolerant to it. But the current generation right now, I believe, as soon as they detect there is less authenticity in a message that's going to them, it becomes less relevant in terms of do I read it or I don't read it. Am I
Oh,
correct?
I agree. I think one challenge for those that are coming new into selling, whether you're founder led sales or sales, you and I came from, I'm the last generation that was classically trained in a lot of, we sat in live offices, we learned through osmosis.
True.
There was a lot of business acumen. Like I went through courses on how to sit down and the etiquette of dinner, of like
Hmm.
business dinners. So I'm like the last generation that ever got trained in that. And now you have generations that on March of 2020 until now have a guaranteed most of their career. That's 4 years in. It's 100% digital. They've worked from home that whole time. And you were probably already hybriding on your way there before COVID fast forwarded all this. So you're going to have an entire generation missing like the natural ebb and flow of conversation, the way that like it's a bit of a ping ponging match during engagement. And so it's easier for our generation to sniff out a lack of authenticity because it's a very subtle art. And it's actually something, the most difficult part to, I actually have found over the years, the most difficult part for companies to get, and they try to bring us in all the time, and I haven't mastered it. It's the copywriting. It's the what do you say, because it's hard, and there is no perfect science to it. But I can tell you that my spidey sense is really good at telling when it's not real. That's like the one thing I do know is what isn't real.
That's right. That's right. And it's pretty, I hear people talking about, if I see a post on LinkedIn with a lot of emoji in it, that means it's generated by AI and people skip over it. So
Well, there's
that's
an
one of
AI
the
button
indicators.
now. You can click AI button and it will redo your post for you.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's crazy. One of the last major topic, I guess, for our conversation today, if you don't mind, is looking ahead in the future. And you started the conversation about the current generation since March 2020. I'm assuming the COVID
Yeah.
pandemic and how people got to go work from home, and that set a different dynamics of how we work together. And most people, I guess, during that period, they were living in a cosmopolitan area where they can go out and see people. During the pandemic, because people are working remote, they ended up buying homes or moving outside of the city, and which makes it a lot more troublesome for them to get to the city and meet with people. I'm assuming this is where the dynamic of business happen is in cities. Looking down the road, what's your future read on sales in general?
I think, okay, there's a couple trends that are already begun that have emerged. The role of the BDR and SDR, which is the young professional who was the appointment setter. In a lot of our customers around the world, that role has been completely terminated or dramatically reduced because companies, if you're a CFO, you looked at it and you said, well, your expensive sellers, your account executives, your account managers, they're the ones that pick up all the real business relationships. They're the ones with all the business acumen. Why are we not making them more productive? Why are they not prospecting? And there's a backstory to this. 15, 20 years ago, a gentleman named Aaron Ross wrote a book called Predictable Revenue. Salesforce invented this idea of splitting the role of prospecting and closing into two different roles. challenge, there was a massive labor arbitrage at that time. A BDR was $35,000 a year, and an account executive might have been 100. So it made sense to separate the roles. Well, now that BDR role wants $75,000 a year straight out of college. So there is no longer the labor arbitrage. And the account executive moved from a field rep who went live into people's offices. They just work from home too anyways. So they're already inside sales. So the long and the short is there is going to be a contraction. There's already been a merge of the two roles. There's a re-ask of account executives to own the relationship with the customer much longer, from lead to close to even carrying it forward. That's trend one. Trend two is going to be, I think there's going to be an actual shrinking of Salesforce between too many different headwinds. Onshore talent, we're going to give the best account executives and account managers more customers, more at-bats, more everything in front of them. And we're going to use tools, artificial intelligence, offshore, the spread of offshoring is just so dramatic right now because there isn't no need to pay somebody $75,000 a year to press a button in Toronto to prospect when you can do that offshore for 1/10 the price. So I believe there will be a massive contraction over the next 5-10 years in sales forces globally because the good sellers will create a disproportionate amount of yield results.
That's right.
And there will be greater and greater ways to make the most productive sellers even more productive. And those sellers will also become more influencers in the market. They will become more facing like you're doing right now and more brand ambassador like stuff.
That's right. That's right. So I want to thank you, Jamie, for coming on the podcast. Unfortunately, we're up against the time here. And that's very generous of you to spend the time you spent with me today. I really appreciate it. Always good to see you. And we should do that sometime again, face to face, hopefully.
Yes.
We know how to do these podcasts now. We don't need to do them over an application online. We can do them face to face, sitting somewhere. I'd love to see you, and I haven't had a chance to see you in Toronto. Maybe that would be a good idea to get together. But on behalf of the channel, on behalf of the audience, thank you so much for coming in. Any last comments, Jim?
No, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
I really appreciate it. Just give me a second. Let me terminate the recording and we'll say proper goodbye. Thank you so much.